Prime Minister Modi in Samarkand said directly in front of the world's cameras, "This is not an era for war, Mr. President," which is as clear a message.
एक्सेलेंसी, मैं जानता हूं कि आज का युग युद्ध का है नहीं, और हमने फोन पर भी कई बार आपसे इस विषय में बात की है।
I felt that we had let down a number of the principles that we've always stood for since independence, especially in our first few statements at the UN. The first 2 or 3 speeches, we didn't mention sovereignty of a member state, we didn't mention the inviolability of borders, we didn't mention the word invasion or the word war, we didn't talk about the inadmissibility of the use of force to settle international disputes. Now, all of these things are things we have said time and time again in every conflict for the last 75 years, and suddenly we didn't say it, and that I thought was an abandonment of principle. I'm pleased to say that India's position did evolve to the point where these principles are now being advocated regularly by India. Why was India reluctant to take a stand against Russia? I'd say there was some practical politics involved. India's had a long relationship with Russia, and before that the Soviet Union, which was a strong backer of India on issues that mattered to us. Kashmir at the Security Council, for example. The Russians often protected us against hostile action by other powers. There's a long series of IOUs there. There's a defense relationship. The Russians are prepared to sell us weaponry that the West was not in the 60s and 70s. And so that weaponry now at one point at peak was 85% of all of India's defense equipment. Now it's come down to about 45% because India has been diversifying. We get arms from Israel, America, France, and so on. But the fact is that 45% is still a lot, and what exists needs to be serviced, needs to be repaired, needs maintenance, needs parts. So you don't suddenly disrupt your relationship with a supplier of all those essential things. There's also, of course, importance in terms of imports of some oil, gas, fertilizers, other commodities. So it's a relationship with some substance that India did not want to lightly dismiss by completely taking a hostile stand. That much I can understand, but I do believe we could have told the Russians where we stood, and it was interesting that finally Prime Minister Modi in Samarkand said directly in front of the world's cameras, "This is not an era for war, Mr. President," which is as clear a message. And as recently as November, Jaishankar, the foreign minister, was in Moscow, and he kept talking about the vital importance of peace and dialogue and so on. So I'd say that India in its own way is pushing for a solution.